Well, hello, true believers, and welcome to the French Quarter. I am your host, longtime comic book reader and moviegoer, Robert French. Now, first, let me just take a moment. Thank you for tuning in or tubing in. With each installment of the French Quarter, I will be bringing you random information on comics, movies, video games, all things nerdtastic. Now, I'm going to keep this first episode really simple with a quick review of my latest comic book grab from Atlas Comics and Willow Lawn, Symbiote SpiderMan. From creative team, longtime favorite, writer Peter David, and new kid on the block, artist Greg Land. Now, Peter David has done just about everything, and I first discovered his incredible work with his incredible run on The Incredible Hulk. This Emerald Foil Beauty was actually the first issue I ever picked up of his. I was like 12 years old. I'm now 39, and I'm still going out picking up back issues that tie in with this landmark issue here. Now, sadly, I don't think I own anything else by Greg Land, which is really shocking considering the hundreds and hundreds of comics I own. But he's probably most famous for his recent run on the Uncanny X-Men and Fantastic Four. Now, if you're like me and you are unfamiliar with Greg Land, Symbiote SpiderMan is an amazing, no, it's a sensational, no, it's a spectacular. It's a really wonderful introduction to his in-your-face cinematic style. I mean, this cover is legit like jumping out at you. In fact, at first glance, I was so taken aback by this jump off the page cover art that I actually misread the title, and I thought it was a reboot of one of my favorites as a kid, and still a fun read today, The Web of Spider-Man. But once my eyes focused past the eye-popping art and I could actually make out the title, Symbiote Spider-Man, I was immediately intrigued. Of course, for the, beautiful art and the soft, cool colors provided by Frank DeMarta. But secondly, once I started thumbing through the first few pages, I could tell right away this story takes place directly after the events of Secret Wars. And I don't have time to explain that, so you just have to look that up. But that's true Symbiote Spider-Man. Now, I've read a few issues of the original amazing Symbiote Spider-Man, and I own a couple myself. But when it comes to tales dealing with Peter Parker, rough and tough, getting to know his new alien suit, I can always go for more. Most of my experience with Peter Parker in the black suit has been, well, just that, Peter Parker in a black suit, which is sexy, but at the end of the day, it's just a suit. Now, speaking of Peter Parker and sexy black suits, this book also features one of my favorite Spider-Man frenemies, Felicia Hardy, Blackcat, or is it the Blackcat? Her choice, of course, who has a super sexy skin-tight black suit all of her own. Meow. Now, it seems Felicia is the love interest or lover interest in this story, which is a great change of pace from the traditional love stories between Peter Parker and Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy. And I've always loved that quasi Batman, Catwoman back and forth that Spider-Man and Blackcat seem to share. And I'm not naive. I'm certain Felicia has her own selfish motives for her actions. And I'm certain in time those motives will come to light. However, in the meantime, we'll just have to wait and see. Will Peter Parker find true love? Or will Felicia break our bad boy Parker's heart?
Bye, Felicia.
Now, let's talk about the beautiful Bubblehead who shares the cover with old Spidey, one of my favorite all-time rogues, and I feel really underutilized, the fishbowl himself, Mysterious Mysterio. Now, for those of you not familiar with Mysterio, meet Quentin Beck, a failed movie special effects artist turned failed bank robber, and a constant thorn in Spider-Man's side. Now, this often underrated non-powered super bad guy has quite often bested Spider-Man. Well, nearly bested Spider-Man and any other opponent that he's come face to face with using his mastery of light and illusion. Now, for a supervillain with no superpowers, he manages to conjure up some pretty impressive spectacles and believable hallucinations that often leave his opponents confused and seriously injured. Now, thanks to the new Spider-Man movie, Far From Home, we'll finally get to see some of that spectacle up on the big screen, which I actually find a little bit strange. I mean, we've had 6 Spider-Man movies, and we're just now seeing this character on the big screen. You would think in a world that pushes special effects, a Spider-Man movie featuring a failed special effects artist would be a no-brainer, but whatever. At any rate, I am super excited to see this character up on the big screen, and really happy to see Jake Gyllenhaal step into this role and the MCU. Now, I'll talk more about Jake Gyllenhaal and Far From Home, Endgame, and some of the sinister events that may be awaiting Spider-Man down the road on a later episode. But for now, let's jump back into our comic. So again, if you're like me and you're unfamiliar with Greg Land's uncanny, in-your-face cinematic style, Symbiote SpiderMan is the perfect read. His choice of story pacing, dramatic angles, really lends the reader to believe they're watching a movie or a show on the CW rather than just flipping through a comic book. And his soft, smooth lines, I mean, they really complement characters like Blackcat, Symbiote SpiderMan. However, he also manages to breathe this bold, fresh new life into that often quirky supervillain. I mean, it can't be easy being green, and it can't be easy taking a guy running around in a green spandex suit, a purple cape, and a punch bowl on his head and make him look menacing. But Greg Land manages to make Mysterio, in my opinion, look the best he's looked in years. So, I probably don't have to sell you on Peter David. He's got decades of work under his belt that speak for itself. But anyway, here goes. Within the first few pages, Peter David lays down some emotional, intense groundwork that really, for the first time, I felt myself more invested in the supervillain story rather than the superhero story. Which I guess is really nothing new. I mean, when I used to read Incredible Hulk, I was always more concerned with the stories involving Rick Jones rather than the old mean greenie. But once again, Peter manages to deliver the perfect blend of superhuman story with the human story, the back and forth banter, a little bit of info, and then bam, a little outlandish action. And speaking of outlandish, Greg Land manages to land some pretty outlandish Easter eggs in the first few pages of this comic, including a nod to his own name, and I know spoilers are forbidden, but I'm pretty sure that's the spaceship from the 1956 black and white space movie Forbidden Planet. Now, little side note, that spaceship was used in a number of black and white B movies, including a few episodes of The Twilight Zone, one called Third from the Sun, which ironically I just saw with my father the other day. It's in there. Alright, so let me wrap this up before I actually do drop a spoiler for this comic book. And in closing, let me just say, if you're always on the hunt for a good Spider-Man read, then head down to your local comic shop and pick up issues 1 and 2 of Symbiote Spider-Man out now. And while you're there, maybe pick up a few other titles depending on your spending budget. And speaking of spending, thanks for spending a little time with me. And until next time, remember, don't spend your quarter anywhere else.